Hello out there. Today is Monday, December 9th, 2019. My name is Matt Fury, and this is The Rough Cut. All right, greetings once again, dear friends and fans of all things post-production related. Thank you for finding and then downloading or streaming this podcast. If you're here by mistake, do me a favor, hang out for about another 45 seconds so this can be counted as an official download of the show. Then again, it's not like I make any money off it, so bail if you must. But if you do stick around, you're going to hear a lot of good stuff. As 2019 starts to come to a close, I thought a great way to send it off would be to dig into the biggest box office hit of the year. And if you look at the top 15 or so movies from 2019, you'll see we've already covered a lot of them. The Lion King, Spider-Man Far From Home, Joker, which was massive, Maleficent, Mistress of Evil, It Chapter 2, all of them killed it at the box office. And who knows, there might be one more big box office blockbuster we'll cover before the year's over. We'll see. But the film at the very top of the list, alone by itself, is the final chapter in what was an epic series of films, and that film would be Avengers Endgame, the fourth and obviously final installment in the Avengers series, but also the epic conclusion to a run of about 22 movies over the past 11 years. A lot of different talented people came together to make those movies, close to 20 directors, notably including Jon Favreau, who kicked the whole thing off in 2008 with Iron Man, but also Joss Whedon and Anthony and Joe Russo for the Avengers films, James Gunn with Guardians of the Galaxy, Anna Boden and Ryan Fleck for Captain Marvel, Taika Waititi is in there too, even Kenneth Branagh. And again, that's just the directors. And so many very talented editors have helmed the media composer for those 22 films. You already heard from Dan Leventhal earlier in the Rough Cut series talking about Spider-Man. But when it comes to being all in on the Marvel Cinematic Universe, our guests today have to be recognized. Together they have been on duty for a little over a third of those 22 films. And those people would be editor Jeff Ford and assistant editor Robin Buday. And just looking at Jeff's IMDb page, he's responsible for all 4 Avengers movies, 3 Captain America movies, and just for good measure, throw in an Iron Man film. In this case, it'd be Iron Man 3. And Robin assisted on almost all of them, and I believe he assisted on another film that Jeff didn't cut. So I think you can tell, if you want to get some hardcore truth about working in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, these are 2 really great guys to call. And call them we did. Here with us today are Jeff Ford and Robin Buday.
Oh, got it.
But, and you'll probably be like, I said that? I totally don't mean that. Why would I say that? All right, so we got a lot to talk about, and I know you guys are busy and you're taking time on your weekend, so I appreciate it. But before we dig into Endgame, as well as all the other Avengers and Marvel movies you guys have been working on together for about, I'd say 7 years now, and I think it's also been 7 films, which is crazy. So you probably haven't gone too many days without seeing one another, for better or worse. But we'll start with you, Jeff. What qualities does Robin have that makes him a good assistant, or perhaps distinguishes him as an assistant editor? And I guess by extension, what is it you would look for in an assistant in general? You know, should Robin decide he wants to get out of editing and just get his real estate license or something?
Oh, that's funny. Well,
Thanks.
Well, let's see. Well, I think what I always look for is attention to detail. That's like the number one skill set that you've got to have if you're going to be an editor. And I think just in general, being a filmmaker requires director or writer, anybody who's making movies, you really have to have a good attention to detail, because movies are really about that. And that's like the base skill set. Then beyond that, it's really about taste and having good taste in acting, story, music, all those things that go into making a film. And, I've worked with a lot of people over the years, and a lot of great people. And I think the common denominator is taste and attention to detail. So that's what I see in assistants when I bring them on, because I'm always looking for assistants who want to become editors. I don't really, I think David Bowie once said something about how every generation's responsibility is to replace the generation before it. So it's like, I want people to want my job. I want them to come take my job away from me and do my job better than I do it. I want to, create another editor that's going to do better than I did. That's my goal in terms of letting people in to work on the crew, because I know it's a privilege to get to work on movies, and I have no illusions about how lucky I've been. So I feel like when we bring people onto the crew, we take it pretty seriously. It's a chance to work on something that's really special, and it's a job that not everybody gets to do. So we kind of take it seriously. And I've been really fortunate. I've had excellent assistants, and Robin's definitely one of the best.
Well, speaking of that, someone else you've also worked with a lot is Matthew Schmidt, who started out assisting you on, I think, the original Avengers and then on Iron Man 3, but has since co-edited with you from, I think, Captain America Winter Soldier up through Endgame. What was it he was able to do, in your opinion, to make the transition from assistant to editor, and how would you help an assistant who wanted to make that transition?
Well, Matt's a superstar now. He's amazing, and he's actually cutting the Black Widow movie right now with Lee Folsom Boyd at Marvel. They're working on that. It's coming out in May. Matt is and was always a really good editor. He always had really great skills and great taste. I think it's really about, you have to show an interest and have a passion for storytelling. You have to be, you have to want to do it. I mean, I've worked with assistants who don't want to become editors. And some of them, are happy being assistants, and that's okay. But I think there has to be a desire. You have to love it. It has to be something that you really, are obsessed with in a way, something that really fascinates you, that you don't mind spending, 10 hours a day doing. Because if you don't love it, it's not a great job. If it's miserable, it's long hours, and it's very stressful sometimes and very intense. If you love it, it's sort of like I kind of guess you could make an analogy for some of these crazier movies that we've done. It's like extreme sports, It's like if you can do that, there's an adrenaline rush and a thrill with taking big risks and working on big projects with the stakes are very high. But it's not for everybody. So I think it's really about, are you passionate about it? It's like any art form, whether it's acting or writing or dance or anything. It's just, you have to have a passion for it, and you have to have it has to make you feel good when you do it, so that you can do it for 10 hours a day, and it gives you something, feeds your soul.
So you talked about long hours. Let's just do the rundown really quick. And if I'm missing one or I got one wrong, forgive me, but 2011, Captain America, the First Avenger. 2012, The Avengers. 2013, Iron Man 3. 2014, Captain America, the Winter Soldier. 2015, Avengers, Age of Ultron. 2016, Captain America, Civil War. Break in 2017 somehow, sort of. 2018, Avengers, Infinity War. 2019, Avengers, Endgame. I mean, that's just a ridiculous run of hard work on big movies. And, Robin, from your perspective, assisting on, I think, almost all of those. I don't know, I think one of them you might not have, and you did a different one. How do you hold up? Like, how do you maintain a sense of stability and a sense of sanity when the work just seems to, one day seems to roll into the next? Literally, 1 year seems to roll into the next with these Marvel films.
Well, like Jeff said, you have to love it. If you love it, it doesn't feel like you're actually going to work most of the time.
That's a good point. So, what happened in 2017? Did you guys finally say, you know what?
Well, we were shooting Infinity War and Endgame.
Yeah, we shot those.
So we were actually working. It was just, we were on a really long year long.
Gotcha. And so, having worked together since around 2011, have there been any significant changes to your post workflow, or even maybe small ones, I suppose, that helped you become more efficient or get more done over those 7 years?
That would be more on the camera side. The processing of dailies has gotten faster and more efficient. As far as the Avid workflows are concerned, they really haven't changed very much.
Well, I would say, though, one thing for us that was, I can't remember when we did it, but we stepped up to a higher resolution compression.
Oh, yeah,
and
sure.
that was something we were always struggling with it because it was storage and speed, and we were wondering when it was the time. And I think it was
Infinity War.
We stepped up to
other shows had started doing it at Marvel before us, but it was our first show at Marvel.
Yeah, we were always wanting to keep things streamlined, and then when we stepped up to that new resolution, it was I think that was a really good
move.
And
5.1 actually now.
And 5.1 audio. Yeah, we kind of upped our game at a certain point because we had more control during pre-production to make sure we could handle it all the way through the pipeline, and went up to DNX 115 for Infinity War and Endgame. Some of the other smaller Marvel shows that didn't shoot as much footage had been doing that, and so we sort of said we should do that too. As an editor, that was one of the biggest impacts for me. And I got to say, Robin can talk more about this, but on the daily side of things, he's got stuff so dialed in that it's almost invisible to me, and I'm totally spoiled. But he is really the master at making that sort of invisible and keeping what is just an astonishing amount of media that flows in every day. He makes it seem easy, and it always gets to me. It's amazing.
What's your secret, Robin?
Well, I was very lucky that I started my career right as Red Camera and Alexa were becoming popular. And I was working at Laser Pacific at first and then Photocam after that. And I learned a lot about tapeless workflows at those places. And I knew all the software that the dailies labs were using to give us dailies. So if something went wrong, I could go, oh, I know what's going on. They're not using this or that. And it was very easy to work out workflow issues. So I'd say that was my advantage. Now it's all kind of common knowledge. It's been around for so long, but at the time it was a specialized knowledge.
So I think there's a theme we're going to keep coming back to, and that is the broader, both the story element of working in the Marvel universe and also just the production, post-production facet. Do you communicate amongst films or amongst production teams, post-production teams about your workflow, your process, or are the films really treated as individual, separate, we're going to do our thing this way, and on, Thor Ragnarok, they're going to do something totally different?
That's a good question. I haven't really talked to other productions much about what their workflows are.
Yeah, I mean, there's some control at Marvel from the visual effects department that we need, because they keep things consistent for us in terms of color and in terms of how the media is managed to some extent, which is common to all Marvel shows. Mm-hmm. But the editor and the directors, when they set up the show, are really the beginning of that plan, knowing what each movie is going to need. And I make it different for each movie that I've done. Each director has a slightly different approach to making these films. And we I think either consciously or subconsciously, we tailor our dailies approach to what kind of movie it's going to be. And so, but on a technical side, we've kind of just kept refining our system over all these films. Robin's been sort of at the center of it since Avengers 1, and we've been refining it to take out stuff that we don't need. Like let's leave steps on the side of the road that we don't need anymore, and not worry about them if we don't need them. And it saves us time and allows us to spend more time on the stuff we do need.
So how would your approach differ if you were working with Joss Whedon versus, Anthony and Joe Russo?
Dailies viewing.
Yeah, like Joss would have a different approach to viewing dailies. He'd watch them in the theater. He shoots a lot less footage than Joe and Anthony, and he watches the material on a daily basis, usually in a screening room. And Joe and Anthony shoot way more footage and tend to watch it on pics. At home or on their devices as they're moving around. So it's kind of we'd have a different day arranged around a director's screening.
Okay, and in terms of having a lot of footage to work with, you said Joss doesn't shoot quite as much as the Russos. How do you feel about that? And is it obviously you have a lot more footage to work with. There's a lot more to go through, but then you have more to choose from.
Well, I don't. Either way works for me. I don't necessarily have a preference because, directors who shoot multiple cameras generate more footage. Joe and Anthony like to run a lot of cameras. They like to run takes without stopping. They don't reset. They like to keep the actors in the mode and just like reset and start the scene again without cutting. That's part of their style for keeping the set light and loose and keeping it relaxed. Joss he's a more precise dude, and his writing is really precise. So he likes to say, let's nail this down in rehearsal and then shoot the take once we have it. It's just a different style of working. Generates slightly different performances. There's no good or bad way. I don't mind a lot of footage, but precision is also something that's really welcome as well.
So when you're talking about directors who are also writers, is there a different dynamic there working with a director who also wrote the material when it comes to cutting things down? Are they more precious about what's being cut or how you approach the edit?
Yeah, they are. I mean, basically, what's interesting is, a director who's written the script will often have a really clear understanding for why every word is on that page and why every bit of direction is on that page. They'll have a really clear plan about what that is. And so we will have conversations about when we remove something, why we're removing it, or when we're adding something, why we're adding it, because we're changing the plan that they had originally laid down. When I deal with directors who have not written the material, but who are very involved with the writing process, they very often are approaching it a little bit more like an editor or like an audience member, where they're trying to determine how the material will be viewed by the audience. Is the story being conveyed? Is the story on the page getting across on screen? And so they're thinking about it a little bit more like an audience member. And I think it gives them a chance to, they're much more open to alternative versions, but the conversations are still the same. It all kind of boils down to storytelling. It's just that people who have written material and who are also directing it, they have a really deep understanding of why all those choices were made initially in the screenplay phase.
So you talked about Joss watching dailies in the screening room, Joe and Anthony watching them on Pix, the remote viewing, wherever they might be. You have, or at least you had, what I think is a somewhat unique process for breaking down and prepping footage after you watch dailies. And when I talked to you in 2012 about original Avengers, for lack of a better, I don't know what you call it, Avengers 1 maybe, you actually watched the dailies in screening as well. But then I thought your process for how you break down the footage was kind of interesting. Could you just give us a quick run through of how you and Robin go from there?
Yeah, I can. And we've actually changed the process a little bit as we've gone along. It evolves a little bit on each show. I still do this, but for long scenes or longer scenes, I have a sort of specific process by which I break down footage. So when dailies come in, we watch them in a screening room. Usually we try to select out all the stuff that isn't part of the performance, the rollouts and the stuff that happens between takes, and just watch the performance content on a screening room just to assess technical quality and see how it has, gives us an impression on the big screen. And we go through that pretty quickly, but it's I try to watch as much as possible. I usually don't watch 100% of it, but almost all of it, and then go into the edit room and I start breaking down the scenes. I usually try to break larger scenes down into 3 acts. So there's the beginning, middle, and end of the scene. Sometimes it goes into 4 segments or 5 segments if it's a complex action scene or if it's fairly rangy. And then I make my selects as I'm going, watching the dailies, and then I'm building the scenes into these sub scenes. And then once I've made all my selects and watched everything that I have, by putting markers in, I kind of know. But what I'm doing basically is looking for shots. I'm looking for shots bits of lines of dialogue or visual performance that play in a particular camera angle or on a particular lens. So I may have, 25, 30 different readings of a line on, 3 different cameras on 3 different lenses. So there's a huge number of choices about each line reading, but only some of those line readings work for those lenses and those camera angles and those performances. So I'm hunting. I'm like kind of going through, and it's like could make the analogy that if you're a cook, you're going to the grocery store to find the best ingredients, so that when you make the food, you've already selected some really great and delicious items to make your dish from. So I'm looking for shots and marking those shots when I see them, and then I'm building up those select reels, and I'm breaking them up by first, beginning, middle, and end of scenes. For shorter scenes, I don't break them up because obviously there's no need to do that. But that's sort of that's my organizational process. And then once the shots are selected, or if I've found the pieces that I like, as I'm watching, I'm kind of going, oh, this shot could play here, and this shot, this could make sense for this moment. Oh, I'm going to need to see this person enter from the back, so I should use this shot for that. You just kind of think about what the story is as you're watching, and stay open to, selecting, good material. You don't want to lose your objectivity. You have to kind of go, well, I got a really good line reading here, but maybe they'll do a better one, and we'll see what happens. And so that process just kind of, rolls on until you start assembling the scene, and then you just, put it together and start refining, and that's where the real editing begins.
So going through that whole process, I know for you, and frankly for a lot of editors, organization is the most important thing, followed closely by prioritization, knowing, when and where something is needed. You talk about using markers to make notes on things, but how do you organize? Do you have a system that you and Robin have worked out for how you organize all those different types of shots? Do you break it down by scenes or readings? I mean, how are your bins structured?
Well, the thing that we did differently on this show, usually Jeff gets a scene bin which has all the shots in it in shoot order, so we can see how the scene progresses throughout the day. And we build a chem roll for him. The only change up we really did on Infinity War and Endgame, because there was so much footage, we built an action roll so that when he was watching the sequence, it wouldn't have all the slates and all that stuff in it. And we also built 2 action rolls by camera for some scenes that were really complex. That's the only real difference. But it's just a basic scene bin, organized in shoot order with a chem roll.
And I work in shoot order. I like to see the progression over the course of the direction. So if the directors start on take 1, and then by the end of that, by the end of shooting the master, they've evolved the scene. I can see what they changed, and it helps me understand a little bit about where they were headed as directors. So I don't like to look at stuff. I like to look at stuff in the order that it was shot, and then I make a select roll of my favorite pieces that could be shots, and usually I keep that in the bin as well. But I don't tend to make really elaborate select rolls, because I've found that once I do a rough cut of the scene, I put it away for a while. Then I'll come back to it later when I have more scenes around it. As the movie starts to be shot, I get more material that surrounds that scene. I start to have a better understanding of how that scene should play. So doing too much fine cutting early on can be problematic because you don't really know the decisions you're going to make. I may go back into the dailies and reselect my choices once I learn that the story's evolved or changed in a certain way. I may need to skew the scene a different way emotionally, or maybe I'm looking for a different way to emphasize a story point. So I'll go back and reselect dailies sometimes in order to change the scene. But for the most part, I like to just do a rough cut of it, make it feel like a good scene that plays well so I can show it to the directors so they can see how their coverage is working. And then I put it away and move on to the next thing so I can go back to it weeks or months later. But very often we have to turn visual effects over early. So, doing good cuts on everything initially is really critical on these movies.
So that seems like something that's sort of a common mistake that up-and-coming first-time editors will make. And maybe you've experienced this or seen this yourselves, in that they will spend so much time trying to finesse a cut when the story itself hasn't been really worked out. And maybe that's just a holdover from never having to work on film or on tape, where it's so hard to make changes at times. Is that something you see? Robin, I know you talk to a lot of younger editors who obviously want to get into the business and start as being assistant editors.
Robin's actually on the project that we're on right now. He's cutting with me.
I'm currently one of those up and coming editors, so you can talk to me about it all day.
He's doing
Oh, don't make that mistake, Robin.
Yeah, he's doing a great job, and he's learning that. So, well, Robin, what do you think as you're starting out?
From what I've seen, the expectations of a cut looking pretty polished when you first show it to director are there, so I can kind of understand their wanting to make it pretty as fine as possible. But to Jeff's point, if you don't have the surrounding scenes, how can you possibly know? So.
It's also about just keeping your mind open to changes. In other words, the movie's not done until you have a chance to watch the whole thing after you've assembled it, and then you can really begin shaping it. It's really hard to edit a movie and bit by bit until you have it all. And then once you have it all, the task becomes something quite different. You're actually focusing it. And I've done a couple of recuts over the course of my career where I've come into movies that have already been completed and I've done a new cut to change it or improve it. And what's interesting about doing those is that you see the whole movie initially. So recut goes much quicker than if you were just originally assemble it, because your decision making has been shortcut because you already really have a wide overview of the film, and you can say, oh, I see where this, if we do this and do this and do this, we'll get, kind of know where you're going, and it's easier to see it that way.
So Robin, you made a really good point about directors or even studio people wanting to see a more polished, more closer to cinema quality cut when they were viewing edits. Is that something that you guys have had to deal with, and how do you address that? Because again, so as Jeff said, so much can still change. You have to be open to change, but at the same time, when you're doing these screenings, people get nervous about it. It looks too rough here. Let's clean up this temp effect, temp audio. Let's tighten up these shots because we want the director, we want the producer, whomever, to feel more comfortable about where this is going.
Well, in the last decade, dailies have come in so quickly that there's more time to work on the edit. And the expectation that it's going to be more fine has just kind of permeated our entire industry, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, and I think also, just the Avid technology has, with the compression rates where you have nearly, HD pristine quality picture now. I remember when I first started working on the Avid, and it was in the mid 90s. Mm-hmm. The compression was, was good, but, it was still a little bit like Cataract City. And now you're looking at these sort of amazing HD images that get put up on a theater-sized screen for previews. And
we're getting into 4K now, too.
It's stunning. And so I think that level of visual information, and then let's not even talk about the advances in sound where you can have 5.1 in your edit room now, and it's actually workable. That level of sort of sophistication technically, everyone starts to get used to it. And so watching a rough cut, some people, lay people might think it's a finished movie at some times, when they're looking at it. If it weren't a visual effects movie, there's a sense that this is a finished picture. Mm-hmm. I don't know that that's a bad thing. I think it's kind of great. It is a little more labor intensive, and you really have to be on your game if you want to maintain a sort of finished feel to the movie as you're cutting. But I think even during production, I don't like to get too into the reads in terms of making things look completely finished until, like I said, we have reels and we can start building things into a screenable version.
building on the whole 5-1 thing, Jeff, I think you had always really dug into doing a lot of audio work in your timelines. Do you still do that? And how do you break down? I mean, I think you used to do stereo mixes and all kinds of different individual deliverables from your audio tracks right within your timeline, whereas a lot of video editors would just be like, I'm going to do just enough sound work to tell the story, but then somebody else is really going to go the last mile.
Well, we've done, I mean, I think I've been doing 3 tracks for or LCRs for a long time. And now I think it was around, I was working with, I helped out on Doctor Strange, and Wyatt Smith was working on that picture, and he was cutting in 5-1. And so I really thought that was cool. And I was nervous and a little bit not sure that was going to be the way to go. But when I saw how he had set it up, it was interesting. And I saw what impact it had for the screenings. It was really a cool thing. So we kind of changed over at that point and planned to do it for Infinity War and Endgame. And it was really great. I have a really special situation on the Marvel movies because we have a sound editing team that's been with us for many, many, many films. It's Shannon Mills, Dan Laurie, and our mixers, Tom Johnson and Juan Peralta. So that crew is amazing, and we work really closely together. Even during production, Shannon will begin making sounds and sending them to me when I ask for them. So he and I collaborate on the sound design process from very early on, because my goal is to not put anything in those tracks that isn't going to be in the final. And I want Shannon to make or bless everything that we put in there. I'll do some basic stuff, doors closing and, repurpose some Foley and do the movement work. But as far as really designy work, I like Shannon to send that to me early. And sometimes he'll send me pieces and I'll make things and we'll work together on it. I love doing that part. It helps me relax. After I've cut a scene, I like to work on the track a little bit just to sort of unwind. And I also think I mix the movie over and over again over the course of post-production as we're screening it. And I do all the temp mixes because that's how I learn how the movie should be mixed, so that when I sit down with Tom Johnson and Juan Peralta, who are 10,000 times better mixers than I'll ever be, I know what to say to them because I've had the experience of like, okay, we want to pull back here. We want to push this. We want to do that. It's sort of like rehearsing editing these movies is almost like rehearsing the last 2 months of the movie when you actually finish everything. You're just sort of like learning things about the movie as you're editing. And part of that means learning about sound editing and mixing of what works in the story and what doesn't.
Well, the music in the Avengers films often feels somewhat anachronistic, whereas you might be expecting synth-driven and kind of techno. You guys have classic rock stuff. You have the Kinks, the Stones, Steppenwolf even. How much of that decision is driven by the music supervisor, and how much of that evolves from the temp music stuff you guys did? Where did that decision, that kind of aesthetic come from originally?
Well, the needle drops in Endgame that's Joe Russo driving that train. He had that conception early on, and he must have sent, 500, 600 songs to me and our music editor, Steve Durkee, and just said, try all this. We got to do this. His inspiration was Martin Scorsese. The idea of in Goodfellas or a film like that where you have these needle drops. In those movies, it was always to sort of illustrate period, and in Endgame, it was to illustrate tone. And Joe had the idea of, can we do this without playing songs we've heard before, stuff that's really deep cuts that fit the movie, that really make the movie pop. And it's a Marvel tradition. Iron Man had AC/DC, and Guardians obviously has the Guardians playlist. So it's not like it's out of the realm of the stylistic of the movies. But Joe Russo was the guy who was really driving that train. And then basically it was mostly those selections were refined and figured out and solved by Steve Durkee, who was our music editor. He was the one who really, really dialed in on those pieces. And then once I had them in the cut, I would structure transitions around them, and we'd use them. Once we had sort of spotted where they would go, I would tailor my picture editing to some of that work. And it was fun. There were some we did that didn't work, and we had more in the movie, and we pulled some of them out because it was just getting to be, it felt like we were listening to somebody's playlist as opposed to telling a story. But that's part of the process. You try many things and then pull back a bit.
So since you brought him up, I'm going to ask, the controversy's kind of died down a little bit lately, and I've already heard you address this issue in another interview I saw you do, and I think it'd be good to capture it again here if we could, and that is the comments that Martin Scorsese made about sci-fi movies, specifically the Marvel movies, not being cinema. And, the debate that came from that, and you, I thought, handled it very eloquently at a presentation you did a few weeks ago, and I just wanted to get your take on that again, if you wouldn't mind.
Oh, yeah, sure. I mean, look, I think it's a healthy conversation to have. I know it was a lot of controversy, but, I love Martin Scorsese's movies. I think he's an amazing filmmaker. And I think there's room for everybody. I think these movies inspire people. I just know also, it's interesting. When I was a kid, I remember really vividly going to see Superman the movie in 1978, Richard Donner's Superman the movie. And it really inspired me. But at the time I went because I was a comic book fan and I loved Superman and I was young and it was like a cool movie and it was this amazing, legitimate version of a character that I had read in the comic books brought to life on screen. And I loved the movie and I went back, like my brother and I used to go to see it all the time. We'd watch it over and over again. And then, eventually that led to, other movies that I started to seek out other films because I realized I loved movies and it sort of got me turned on to filmmaking. And from there, I started watching movies by Scorsese and Coppola and Spielberg and Lucas. And it sort of just expanded from that initial inspiration. So somewhere out there's a kid who sees Endgame and says, I want to be a filmmaker. And that might inspire them to do it. Is it cinema? Is it art? Who knows? I don't know what that means. But what I do know is that we try to make the best possible movie we can. And we all consider ourselves filmmakers. We're trying to make, great cinema, not just great comic book movies. It's, Joe and Anthony Russo are filmmakers first. And they're really good filmmakers, really talented, have great taste. So I think I think there's room for everybody, and I think diversity of genre is a cool thing. I will say the one thing I totally think is important is we should try to see movies in theaters. I really feel like the communal experience of going to a movie in a theater and sharing a movie as an audience is a profound and important act that you can do. It brings people together, and it's a different experience than watching something at home or on your phone. When you're in an audience and you hear people react at a comedy or a horror movie or, when the superheroes come out of the portals or whatever, that's a really cool moment. You're sharing that with your fellow audience members. And I don't think there's enough emphasis on how important seeing movies in theaters is. That's my big, if I wanted to make my statement, that's my statement is, go to the movies, take your kids and find stuff that excites you and reaches you. That's what art is anyway. Everybody has to seek out that which inspires them, and that's which pushes them forward.
Well, that's a great statement to make. And I interviewed Paul Hirsch about a month or so ago, who Star Wars and Planes, Trains, and Automobiles.
He's great. What a great actor! He's amazing.
Yeah, amazing. And he very similar to you. And to I hate the fact that people aren't going to see. He didn't like where cinema was going. And he very much like you, that this is a communal. These films are meant to be enjoyed, appreciated in a community setting for all the reasons that you illustrated. Interesting that you brought up Superman. If memory serves, that film, Superman 1 and Superman 2, Richard Donner's films, actually was originally shot as a single film and then just got, through politics and through other story reasons, got broken up into two different movies. For the final two films for Avengers, what was the approach there? Was that ever originally going to be a single movie? Was it always planned to be two movies? Did you shoot them at the same time?
We ended up shooting both films at the same time, and that was always planned to be. Part of it was because when you look at the cast that we're dealing with on these movies, there's just so many logistics to try to get everybody to jigsaw that cast and their availability in for so many shooting days, for so much stuff, that in order to take advantage of some of the efficiencies of putting it together was tempting. And so the plan was always that way. They were always meant to be shot interleaved, meaning we would shoot, Endgame on Monday and Infinity War on Tuesday and Endgame on Wednesday. It was sort of jump around with a slight emphasis towards getting Infinity War out before. Obviously, that stuff was front loaded to some extent, but we were really jumping around. Also, we took advantage of different locations. When we were in Scotland, we shot a sequence for Infinity War in Edinburgh, and then we shot another one. We shot New Asgard for Endgame at the same time because we had our company in Scotland. So there's a bunch of ways we took advantage of that, and we were able to sort of hone down and shave off some of the work over the course of that year. But it was incredibly intense, very difficult to do, very exhausting, and I think, Robin, we were on, when did we start? We started in January of 2017?
I set foot on the ground in Atlanta January 2nd of 2017, and I didn't leave till December, so almost a full year. And then Corey and Hector, who are our second assist, they didn't leave for another month after that.
Yeah, they were there till February or January. Yeah. And then we did another production period in September, October of 2018 to finish Endgame, and then we went back and did reshoots in January of 2019 to finish for Iron Man Snap, and that was all, and a bunch of other stuff. We did that in LA. So we were shooting all of 2017 pretty much, and it was we were exhausted.
Yeah. Well, Robin, as the steward of all that media, and then the person that's more or less having to run the cutting room.
How much did we have, Robin? It was like a bajillion.
We had we had over 200 terabytes of DNX 115.
And so, did it just feel like, okay, this is just one giant big movie to me, but my process still remains the same, or did you have to do anything different to coordinate? Well, these pieces are for this film, and these pieces are for that film, and everything's going to be at arm's reach whenever Jeff needs it.
The dailies process was the same as any other Marvel movie. It's just a huge movie. The big thing on this one is we had a lot of motion capture.
Oh, yeah.
And that's a very complicated process because they're using these prosumer cameras that don't hold time code very well, and it's a nightmare in the editorial room to get it all in sync and delivered. Sometimes we'd fall a few days behind on that just because it was so much stuff. But the normal daily stuff for the Alexa camera-based stuff is pretty much the same as all the other Marvel movies.
So when you're doing a film or films like these, fantasy, science fiction type things, there are just certain things that you have to walk the line between explaining and setting up structure, like where somebody's powers come from or how something should work or what the limitations may be, versus just letting the story be and letting people enjoy what's happening. Do you guys ever find, like, as you're working through this stuff, like, wait a minute, Iron Man shouldn't be able to do this because in the last film he wasn't able to do it? I mean, how do you keep track of all that stuff, and how do you find the balance between the context of setting up what the rules are versus just letting the story play out?
Well, we have a lot of conversations about that. I mean, that's the Marvel sort of secret sauce, is that there's this incredible network of collaborators at Marvel. So we're dealing with, Kevin's the man in terms of like keeping all that together, and he's watching everything and guiding us. So he's also really helpful in kind of giving us heads up on where things are going and how we should manage things. But having worked on a lot of these movies, I mean, a lot of this stuff sort of feels like it's the same story, so you just keep telling it. So we know, that we know a lot about Tony from all the films we've worked on. And we know a lot about Tony and Cap's relationship. And I certainly know a lot about Cap, having cut most of his arc in the MCU. So, following that stuff is a little bit subconscious at that point. You're starting to go, oh, well, I know what their deal is, and I know how we wanted to, change it up here. And I think one of the cool things about Endgame is, Cap and Tony in a weird way kind of, switch places in that. And I think this was always the plan from the Russos and Marcus and McFeely, was that, Cap's a guy who never had a life, and Tony's the guy that had the life and had to learn to give it up. And I think it's the fact that they, have this swap at the end is pretty cool. That kind of character arc stuff is sort of second nature, and we kind of, it's kind of built into our process because we've been working with the characters so long. But as far as like the technical issues of whose powers are what, or the continuity of the timelines and when things occurred and what year should this be and what year should that be, we have a lot of people helping with that. There's like Trin Tran, our producer, was always on it. And we had just a ton of people at Marvel that would always chime in if we were off base on anything, like in those little detail things. And then a bunch of stuff you just have to say, I don't care, we're going to change it because this is cooler. And we do that all the time. That's like, that just has to be the way it works. It's like, can Thanos pull the Power Stone out of the gauntlet and punch Captain Marvel? Yes, he can, because it's awesome and it looks really cool. So we do that all the time. And I think that's, part of the fun of it is like you can find a way to break some rules. There's certain rules you don't break that you just don't want to break, where the audience won't give you a pass. And those instinctively you have to know what those are.
Well, I think you kind of answered my next question about how tied you guys are into the other films that you aren't working on. When you watch a film that you didn't technically have anything to do with, like we'll go back to the Thor film, like when you watch Thor Ragnarok, is it all new to you? Or are you like, wow, I had no idea that this is where that was going to go, and and it's giving my ideas for like how I want this to play out in Avengers later on? Or
No. They share that information with us while they're writing. Usually it's very close to they're very careful about what they tell us. But then once the movies are finished and in post-production, very often we get to look at them before they're done, so that we, and that's the only time we really should look at them, because quite frankly, those movies are evolving and changing so dramatically while they're shooting them and cutting them that once they start to have previews, Kevin will invite us in to take a look sometimes, and especially if it, like with Ragnarok, it was interacting with Infinity War, and Captain Marvel was interacting with Endgame, and so we needed to be on the same page in order to dial those characters in. We actually shot Brie before they shot her for Captain Marvel. I think we started shooting Brie in that characterization before they rolled film on Captain Marvel. So it was crazy.
Yeah, I think I read something about that having an impact. Like there was her suit, the Captain Marvel uniform was out of sync somehow because of that.
Yeah, we changed it. We had to redo it. It's a CG uniform in Endgame because they hadn't finished the design when we shot it. So the design changed. We want to carry it forward in a way that's logical for the storytelling, but it's one of those things. It's like, it's just so crazy. You just got to roll with it. You got to really, that's the key, by the way. And that's the theme of our crew and everybody that worked on Endgame and Infinity War. It's like at that point, we just had a group of people who were so good at rolling with whatever was thrown at them that, you don't have an emergency if every day is emergencies. Mm-hmm. you redefine emergency, and emergency becomes Tuesday, because every day it's like, Robin, by the way, there's 18 hours of mocap footage that I just shot with Josh Brolin. It would be over here by 2 p.m. and we need to cut it tomorrow. And it's like, okay, that's what we do. I mean, some days we're like that. You just do it. Other days it was like, what's for lunch? But it was always pretty nuts.
Well, one really cool thing about Infinity War and Endgame was the time warping elements of it, and just having fun with the whole Back to the Future concept. How did you guys actually manage that production-wise, where you're going back to older films? Are you stealing? Because I don't know. You see them back, in the original film, and there are different angles, and they're having to redo certain scenes. Again, very much like Back to the Future and Back to the Future 2. How did you guys manage that process? Were you able to reuse footage from the original, or did you have to reshoot everything?
Well, I don't know if it's a secret or not, but there's very little reuse. I know we see the roundy round where the Avengers, first assemble when we go back to New York, and that's, we did some shots that connect us back up to that famous shot where they're all in a circle, and that's from the first movie. And when Quill is dancing around on Morag before Rhodey conks him on the head and knocks him out, he's sort of reproducing his dance from the title sequence of Guardians of the Galaxy. We reshot that, but we also used a couple of shots from Guardians, interspersed to try to shake it up. So I don't think there's almost no reuse really, except for those couple of instances. Everything else we reproduced with new photography. And it was, we had to, because we were looking at it from a new perspective. We didn't want to go back into those stories. We want to see it from the backstage view. You want to be looking at it from another angle, another vantage point, another POV.
One of the topics we'd like to visit a lot here on the podcast is when an editor does so much more than just editing, or goes above and beyond, or does things that might surprise somebody to learn, like, wow, the editor had a role in that as well. Something that's been documented a little bit is the now famous "I am Iron Man" quip from Tony at the end of Endgame. And Jeff, you apparently had a lot to do with that. Now, Robin, I don't know if you were in the room or you had a vantage point to seeing all this happen, so maybe you have a take on how that all went down. But I'd like to hear a little bit about how Jeff Ford, the editor, is now, at least for one line, a screenwriter.
Well, first of all, here's the thing. These movies are made during screenwriting phase, they're made during production, and they're made during editing, and they're being rewritten and rewritten and rewritten all the time. I mean, I contributed a bunch of ideas, of course, because I'm there in the room with the Russos. I was in the room with the writers. We were all talking, for months. And I had pitches and ideas. Joe is like a pitch machine. He's like constantly adding stuff to the movies every day, every minute. Anthony does the same thing. Marcus and McFeely are rewriting constantly. Trin came up with the idea of chopping Thanos' head off at the beginning of the second movie. Kevin is like another font of like amazing ideas constantly. It's you can't even. It's such a collaborative process that everybody is contributing all the time, and it's a testament to how good we work together as friends, that nobody takes anything too personally. And I think that's important, that you have it's an open place where you can pitch ideas. And a lot of times you say, okay, I have a really stupid idea. And then you say it and it ends up being the thing that's in the movie. But to speak to that Iron Man line, that occurred through a process of editing with Joe. And what we were doing was we were like, we need to get a last line for Thanos in this movie. He needs to say something. And we've established this motif over the course of the film where he keeps calling himself inevitable. And I thought, well, he should say at the end, when he feels like he's won, that he's inevitable. And then Tony needs to have a response. And the logical response is, well, I'm Iron Man. So I think the idea of that couplet came from the evolution of trying to solve Thanos' arc and Tony's arc together. And I think, it's one of those happy accidents where the rhythm just ended up that way. And it was something that the way Brolin had done that. And the movie almost writes itself at a certain point. It starts coming up with these ideas. The footage starts revealing itself. But that occurred from editing that scene and trying to figure it out. And by the way, this happens on every movie, visual effects movie, superhero movie. Martin Scorsese does it all the time. You find things in editing that create storytelling opportunities that change the screenplay. And this is something that's been done, since movies began. And the more you understand that editing is really just an extension of writing, an extension of filmmaking, then the more you realize what you can do with that process. It is the single most exciting and amazing part of filmmaking to me, is editing, because it is really where the movie forms. It's totally unique to cinema. There's nothing like it. You can have a drama, you can have a play on a stage, which is acting. You can have a symphony, which is music. You can have a book, which is writing. But editing, that's just movie. That's all cinema.
So, Robin, being around in an environment like that, where it's very dynamic, very creative, and things are constantly changing, and there's always room for like, oh, we can add this, or we can change that. I know a lot of editors and assistants, somehow they end up in the movie in certain ways, whether it's voiceover or I know famously that happened on Spider-Man Far From Home. Dan Lebenthal's assistant became the voice of the artificial intelligence. Have you ever benefited from a situation like that? Have you ever worked your way into the movie somehow?
I am the computer voice that says initiate system in Zola's basement in Captain America 2.
In Winter Soldier, yeah, you're the yes. Initiate system guy.
Initiate system. How's that?
That was no plug-in, by the way.
That's funny. This is a good jumping off point, because Jeff, before we started rolling the recorder here, I mentioned to you that in all the interviews I do, when I talked to you in 2012, you gave me a quote that I've never heard from anyone else since, and I often repeat it to editors that I talk to. Do you have any idea what it might have been, that little piece of advice you gave me that has been so quotable?
No. What did I say?
Okay. I'm going to, after hearing Robin's performance, I'm going to read it to you directly here. Let's see. Okay, here it is. This is Jeff Ford in 2012, and if I had my act together, I'd actually play you the quote. Jeff says, I think if you want to edit motion pictures, narrative feature motion pictures, you've got to understand acting. You have to take an acting class. You've got to learn how actors work. The more you know about performance and how performance art is created by that actor, the better you're going to be.
Oh, yeah. I agree with that. Whoever said that.
I would hope so.
Yeah, no, that's important. It is.
Well, nobody else has ever said that. That's your unique take.
I'll tell you
on the editing process.
I'll tell you an interesting story. I was doing a movie once with Jeff Bridges, and he was in the editing room. We brought him in to look at a cut, and he was so sophisticated in the way he could talk about editing, and he told me that he had learned a little bit of editing, and he learned from his friend Hal Ashby, which I thought is a pretty good guy.
That's a pretty good person to learn from.
But he understood the fine details of editing, and I said, "Wow, this is so cool! You know so much about editing. It's so great." And you can talk about it like an editor. And he said, well, I have to. I'm an actor. I got to know how it gets put together. And I thought that's so cool that that he had such an understanding of it. But I think really that's not an uncommon thing to find as you work in this business, that Robert Downey Jr., his father was a director. He is a really sophisticated mind when it comes to filmmaking. He understands how films are made. The good actors really do have an understanding of how it gets put together. And the more I learn that, the more I feel like it's really important for me to honor what they've done as actors. And I have to make sure that I'm really caring for what they've done as an editor, or else I'm not really honoring what their art is. I'll tell you what else is fun about acting classes. You don't have to be good. You just have to do it. It's actually really fun. It's like, it's one of those things where if you get together and play softball with your friends on the weekend, it's super fun. You don't have to be, a Major League Baseball player. You can work at a level that's not, incredibly sophisticated or even good, and still learn a lot about the process.
We talked about Paul Hirsch a little bit earlier. I brought up Paul Hirsch. And in the conversation with him, we discussed what at the time was a relatively new idea, and that was the end credit tag that he put into Ferris Bueller, and the reason why they went that route. And that's something that you guys really have embraced. And the starting with Avengers, the shawarma scene. Can you tell me a little bit about that, how that came about, and the impact that it had on you as an editor, and how you had to really jump in and go above and beyond to make sure that got done?
Well, so we were cutting the movie, and Robert had asked Joss to write a bunch of funny lines for the end after the battle was over. And so Joss wrote like 10 or 15 different goofy quips that he could say at the end when he was lying there on the ground after he was revived by the Hulk. And one of them was, we should get some shawarma. And he did that line. And then during the final battle, we went back and added a shawarma place in the background of one of the shots just to justify the shawarma place that he had seen. And then we decided that Joss had the idea that it would be really cool if they were all sitting around eating shawarma at the end of the movie. But we were finished. We were done. We had finished all of our reshoots. We were in the final mix. The movie was almost done. And Kevin's like, well, we got to do that. And the only time we'd have the cast together would be at the premiere of the movie. So we organized a shoot. I don't know how Kevin and Lou and Victoria pulled this off, but they put a shoot together and we shot the scene after the premiere of the film in Los Angeles. And it did not make it onto the international release of the movie because it was too late. But we shot it at a restaurant in LA, and there was a billboard outside that was advertising the movie, and the buses were going by with the ads for the movie on it. I'm like, well, it's pretty late to shoot a shot, but we did it.
And by the way, we processed the dailies in the back of a camera truck. Jeff cut it on a laptop in front of Joss on set, and we emailed the EDL to Kieran, who was the first assistant on that show, and he put it into the movie.
Yeah, it was cut on set
in a couple hours
on the back of a lift gate on Pico Boulevard. It was on a laptop on Avid. It was a total guerrilla move, and it's I love that thing.
So even on a giant film franchise like Avengers and the MCU, there's still kind of an indie vibe at times.
Oh my God! Half the shit was made up as we were going along.
Okay, so talking about finishing, we really should wrap this up because I know you guys get stuff to get back to. But also in the same vein, Jeff, forgive me for quoting you to you again for the millionth time, but you once said you actually never finish these movies. Eventually, they just come and take them away from you. Knowing that, are there times when you watch these films after the fact where you think, if only I had a little more time, I might have done this or that differently?
Oh my God. Yes and no. It's weird. Like there's things, occasionally there's things where I'm like, oh, I think I would have approached that differently when I see them again, months or years later. But there's something weird that happens once I see the movie with an audience out in the world. It's almost like it's a cement or something that hardens, and you feel like it's not changeable anymore because it belongs to the world. And it's why I don't really love recuts. I don't love movies where people go back and do the director's cut and it's the new version or whatever. I'm like, well, you know what? It represents a time and a place. And so I feel like this is what it was. And when you watch it, I never really engaged that idea that it's still a work in progress. It's done, and that's what it ended up being, and it's perfect in its own perfection.
So even though we're going into overtime a little bit, I'd be making a big mistake if I didn't ask you this. Having worked on these films for so long and gone through this arc from Avengers all the way through Endgame, as well as the Captain America and Iron Man 3, just looking back on all this whole experience, how do you just sum all of this up for both of you?
It was incredible. I mean, I've never experienced anything like that in my life. I don't think I ever will again. I feel honored.
Yeah, I think I think the best way to describe it for me is I'm just incredibly grateful, and I'm incredibly grateful. Weirdly, not the run was amazing, and working on these films was incredible, but I think the thing I'm most grateful for is the people that I met. I mean, the cast of these films was so great. Everybody. Pretty much fantastic from the top down. But the most important thing was the crew that I worked with. I mean, starting with the Marvel team, Kevin, Lou, and Victoria, who I adore, and Robin and Matt and everybody on the crew over the years. We worked together for many years. We were like a family. And I think we did really good work, but we spent, 8 years together. And I think we all look back on it quite fondly, and that's something that is really hard to put a price on, or you just have to be grateful for an experience like that.
And there you go, 2 super guys telling you all about editing superhero movies. But if you took anything away from the podcast, I hope it's that being a great editor or a great assistant editor isn't specific to any style of film. You just have to know how to tell a really good story. Showing up on time and being fun to work with probably helps too. And those guys did all 3 things for me on this interview, so I want to thank them for doing the podcast and sharing their experiences and advice with all of us. Speaking of sharing, why don't you share the gift of Media Composer this holiday season? Even better, give that gift to yourself. You deserve it. You've worked hard all year. Time to start taking care of you, right? And this being the season of giving, there's probably some kind of promo or discount running right now for Media Composer. I don't know, but I'll put a link right to the store or to any promo directly in the show notes for the podcast. And don't forget, there's still a little time left to enter to win editor Paul Hirsch's book. It is a great book. If you're not sure what I'm talking about, you have to listen to the podcast we did with Paul a little while back. It is a terrific podcast about a great editor who wrote a great book. All right, I'm probably behind on my holiday shopping too, so I should get going. First thing on my list is to get you another podcast. Subscribe to The Rough Cut so you can make sure it gets delivered on time. I don't want you to miss one. But until then, this is Matt Fury thanking all of you for joining me here on The Rough Cut.